Hello, my name is Jeronimo Leon, and as you could probably guess by the intro, I'll be speaking to you about my language community. Firstly, I'll explain what a language community even is. A language community is a group of people who speak the same language or dialect, but I like to define it as a group of people that speak in the same manner. This is because I think what makes a language community what it is the way the people that are part of the community are brought up, as well as how they speak those languages around certain people and places. So, the languages I'll be talking about are English and Spanish, which is pretty common around Miami. Spanish is my first language, which I learned growing up in Mexico City. English is the second language I'll be talking about, which I learned in my old school back in Mexico, although I didn't start speaking English fluently until I had moved to Miami in the 7th grade. I'll be showing you some pictures of my old school so you can get an idea of what type of environment I was in. Next, I'll share what I connect these languages to, or in other words, what these languages mean to me. For Spanish, since I grew up speaking it in my early childhood, it reminds me of Mexico City, especially if whoever's talking it speaks with a Mexican accent. And although I learned English in Mexico, um, and I have some memories connected to the language from there, I associate it more to Miami because here is where I had my first experience actually communicating the language and trying to get better at speaking. I also associate Miami to the place where I integrated English and Spanish together, meaning when I had trouble trying to speak English, I would think in Spanish and try to connect those languages together. Next, I'll be showing you some text between me and my mom so you can get an idea of how we integrate these languages together, as well as some terms that we can make up, which can be from transforming phrases to words we reduce. So in this first text, you will see how in some of the text we reduce the amount of words we write. As you can see, my mom texts, Mañana voy ex ella. So what is X? She uses the X as the symbol in math in Spanish, so instead of the actual letter. This way in Spanish it actually reads, Mañana voy por ella. That is just one example of how we shorten words or phrases, which I will show more of. Next, we can see where I respond, pensé que they would tow the car there. Here you can see I use the letter Q as a shortcut to writing que. Like for example, when texting in English, we sometimes, instead of writing the word for, we write the number for as a shortcut. Continuing in the sentence, I also switched to English, as you can see, because it helped me get my point across faster. In this next text, you will see another example of how we shorten words we use in my language community. In the text exchange, you can see as my mom was asking me for the names of some of my friends that helped me with a charity event I held. In that last text that I sent, I write, o nada más first names. What nada más means is nada más, which translates to nothing but. This is also a way of saying the word just. So there are many more examples of how we change these words that have become the norm to use between people in this language community. Here is another example of some communication that involves code switching. We can see how all throughout this conversation, my friend and I switch between English and Spanish. In the first text, I write notes in English, which is evidence of the code switching I mentioned earlier. In my friend's first response, he also writes chequear, which is a modified Spanish word derived from the word check. Further along, we can see how there is also more evidence of code switching. You can also tell in this exchange how I communicate differently with my friend than with my mom. There are many different rhetorical situations we encounter in our day-to-day life, which dictate how we communicate with different people. Personally, I'm not as formal when speaking with my friends than with my parents. The same is true when communicating with professors, classmates, or strangers. As you can tell, my language community has many ways of expressing themselves by creating new words that are faster and more efficient at getting whatever point you're trying to make across. My language community is not the only one that does this, as you can see it all around us. Now, I'd like to share some of the words we use in my community. First up is chamba. This basically means work. An example of how you would say this is ¿Cómo va la chamba? Which means how's work going? This is like an informal way of saying work. There is also mande, which means what or come again. We use this when either someone calls your name or maybe if you didn't hear something right. Finally, we have the word smoking, which is the word for a tuxedo. This word merges English and Spanish together because the word is derived from the smoking jacket. There's evidence of merging words between English and Spanish in a lot of the Spanglish vocabulary. In this language community, our vocabulary is very versatile, which becomes very useful since we can both be formal and informal while still using the same words. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something interesting about my language community during my vlog.